The Sturmtiger is one of those bizarre weapons remembered simply because it existed. It combined a super heavy tank with a naval depth charge launcher and turned it into something capable of leveling entire buildings with a single shot. But using it in combat was just as strange and awkward as the weapon itself, and absolutely horrific for everyone involved. The horror of urban combat had been etched into the German psyche after the brutal fight for Stalingrad in 1942. Building by building, heavy close quarters fighting through shattered cities was a new and unique challenge, and the Germans were about to come up with a unique solution. Their tanks, designed for open combat, were now almost useless in these conditions. Urban combat gave immense advantage to the defending side, where snipers, anti-tank teams, and small ambush groups who knew every corner could hold up entire battalions. The concept of an infantry support vehicle wasn't new to the German army, and it actually began before the war, with vehicles equipped with low-velocity short-barreled guns designed purely for high explosive firepower. These were the Stug 3 and Panzer IV, before they were equipped with anti-tank guns, or the Brummbär, based on the Panzer IV chassis but armed with a 150mm gun. However, the next vehicle of that concept would be on steroids. So, to avoid wasting hundreds of infantry lives clearing buildings in urban combat by hand, the Germans wanted something that could make the building bothering them not exist anymore, preferably with one shot, in the form of a heavily armored vehicle that could survive all the dangers of city fighting, come close to a target, and deliver a terrifying knockout punch to any fortified position. Initially, it was planned to be armed with a 210mm howitzer, but fate had something more creative in mind. By September 1943, the industrial giant Krupp was drawing up plans for a new weapon based on the Tiger I chassis. The Tiger was already a scary tank, but this thing would make the original Tiger look like a house cat by comparison. Instead of a conventional cannon, this thing would carry a 380mm rocket-assisted mortar, and if you wonder what that is, it's a weapon originally designed by the Kriegsmarine to hunt submarines. It fired massive projectiles from ships, which served as depth charges with huge payloads meant to create underwater shockwaves. Then someone got the idea that this could work in a tank and give it enough power to bring down buildings with one hit, so the Germans began to look for a way to mount one. By February 1944, 3 of the vehicles based on the Tiger I chassis, now called Sturmpanzer 6 or later Sturmtiger, were complete. Only 18 would ever be built, partly because each cost a staggering 300,000 Reichsmarks, nearly 3 times the price of a Panzer IV tank, and partly because they were built only on the hulls of disabled Tigers, as by that time in the war, resources had dwindled significantly. However, the Reich was betting that a handful of these specialized vehicles could turn the tide in urban battles. But before their debut in battle, let's first explain how bizarre it is to actually operate the Sturmtiger. Let's start with the most interesting thing, of course, its absurdly oversized armament. Mounted in a fixed casemate was the 380mm Raketenwerfer 61, which was a short, breech-loading barrel designed to launch a rocket-propelled projectile. In short, it was everything but a conventional artillery piece. It had a 2-stage firing mechanism. The first stage was a propellant charge that would eject the round out of the barrel, while the second stage was the ignition of an internal rocket charge that would propel it to the target, at least in theory. In practice, it couldn't actually hit anything smaller than a building beyond point-blank range, despite having a theoretical range of 6,000 yards. When sent on a mission to blow up the Remagen Bridge, 7 Sturmtigers failed to hit the bridge even once. Hitting moving targets was also out of the question. Firing a Sturmtiger was anything but a pleasant experience. Because of its 2-stage firing design and the immense weight of the shell, it produced enormous backblast and recoil. The gun's barrel had exhaust ports to deflect gases out of the tank and help stabilize the pressure, and the recoil system absorbed some of the kick when the 800-pound shell was launched. And if that thing misfired or the blast vented wrong, well, your face might end up looking like the one in the thumbnail. And let's just say, things did happen. When the rocket charge ignited, it kicked up dust and debris, blinded and disoriented the crew, and made the tank's position visible from space. However, when they hit close enough to the target, the projectile was definitely not something you'd laugh at. Shells weighed between 760 and 830 pounds, which is roughly around 350 kilograms, and they came in a few varieties. The most common was the high explosive round for destroying what was described as, quote, massed living targets. It had a 275-pound explosive charge that was well capable of flattening bunkers or destroying everything in a wide circle around it. The second variant was essentially a high-explosive anti-concrete munition designed to punch through up to 8 feet of reinforced concrete and destroy everything breathing inside. A bow-mounted MG-34 was its anti-infantry protection, and some models even had a rear-mounted launcher designed to fire anti-personnel mines in a full 360-degree arc to defend the vehicle from infantry flanking attacks. You are now maybe wondering how they loaded an 800-pound, 4-foot-long round into the gun and how many of them they could carry. Because of their sheer size, only 14 rounds could be carried at most, and that includes one loaded in the breech and one placed on the loading tray. To even load shells into the vehicle, they had to use a crane mounted on the rear and hoist each rocket through a loading hatch on the roof, one by one. Once the shell was inside, it had to be maneuvered onto a loading tray and then pushed into the breech by the two loaders. So as you can imagine, the reloading was slow and dangerous for its own crew and almost impossible to do in battle conditions. The realistic rate of fire was around 1 round every 10 minutes. However, it was never really intended to fire more than 1 or 2 shots anyway, and you'll see why when we look at how they were used in combat. The Sturmtiger was as heavy as the King Tiger, about 68 tons, and the reason for that was its armor. It had 150 millimeters or 6 inches of frontal armor sloped at 47 degrees, with sides measuring 3.2 inches and a 2-inch thick roof. This way, it was specifically protected against the threats it would face in urban combat. It had a crew of 5, and unlike in traditional tanks, there were 2 loaders, a commander who also served as a gunner, a driver, and a radio operator who doubled as the bow gunner. Although the superstructure looked spacious from the outside, on the inside the crew was cramped between huge shells and equipment. By the time it could actually be used in combat, Germany was fighting a losing war and was constantly on the retreat, where you don't really need to destroy enemy bunkers and cities, but they would still be, let's say, interesting when used in a few engagements. In 1944, the Sturmtiger entered service and was organized into 3 armored assault mortar companies, each consisting of 4 vehicles. Despite being initially intended for the Eastern Front, most of the action it would see happened in the West. The first time the Sturmtiger was used more or less as it was intended, in urban warfare against fortified resistance, was during the Warsaw Uprising. The Polish Home Army, mostly civilian resistance, launched an uprising against the German occupation of Warsaw. As they were well fortified inside the city, the Germans found an ideal chance to test their weapon in exactly that kind of environment. 3 Sturmtigers were brought in and helped in the destruction of the city as a form of retaliation. It was confirmed that they could, indeed, collapse entire buildings with a single hit. A few months later, Sturmtigers were deployed in the Ardennes offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge. They were intended to destroy Allied strongpoints during the advance. However, in the wooded terrain, snow, and with few targets that suited the Sturmtiger's capabilities, they weren't of much use. Most of them either broke down or ran out of fuel and were abandoned and destroyed by their own crews. But one interesting action involving Sturmtigers happened in early March 1945. The Allies had crossed the Rhine River and captured the Ludendorff Bridge at the town of Remagen, pushing armor and infantry across to expand a bridgehead. On the other side, the Germans did everything they could to stop this and destroy the bridge. They even fired V-2 ballistic missiles and then, of course, sent a Sturmtiger to try its luck. Although it couldn't hit the bridge due to its brilliant accuracy, it turned its attention to US armor gathering around a village nearby. A single Sturmtiger shell landed among parked US tanks and exploded. The result was 3 Sherman tanks completely destroyed with their crews killed, while everything and everyone in a wide circle around them was either damaged or wounded. In the final weeks of World War II, a single Sturmtiger was ordered to destroy a church tower that was believed to be used by American forces as an artillery observation point. However, its crew knew that the war was almost over, and they ignored the order to destroy a German church. They decided instead to attack American forces head-on, but as they were approaching, the left track broke and the tank was stopped near the town's houses. The commander didn't want to blow up the tank as the shells would obliterate nearby homes, and the crew decided to bail out. They were met with heavy fire and 2 of them were killed, while the rest were wounded and captured. Their Sturmtiger was left intact beside the broken track and was later taken by the Allies for analysis. With the war, the story of the Sturmtiger ended, and today only 2 of them are displayed in museums.